All right, let's get started with another deep dive. Today, we're going to try to tackle two little words that I think give a lot of English learners headaches.
Oh, for sure.
Can.
Yeah.
Could.
Yeah.
And, you might think you've got them figured out, but I think there's more to these words than meets the eye.
I think you're right.
So we're using as our guide for this deep dive the English Unlocked podcast.
Okay.
And one thing that really surprised me is how could isn't just like the past tense of can,
Right.
but it's used for a whole bunch of other things like being polite or talking about what if situations or even just making suggestions.
Yeah, it could be a real game changer in how you sound in English if you can really master those subtle uses of could.
So let's dive in.
Okay.
English Unlocked starts off, with the basics.
Yeah.
And they say can is your go-to word for talking about things you're able to do right now.
Right.
Or things that are possible.
Right.
Like, I can bake a mean chocolate cake.
Right.
Or it can get pretty chilly here in the fall.
Yeah, and think about all those times we use can for just asking permission or making requests.
Yeah, that's right.
Like those simple phrases, can I use your phone? Or can you open the window?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Now, when we move on to could, I think things get a bit more interesting.
Yeah, it's a little more slippery.
English Unlocked points out that could often steps in when we want to be more polite,
Right.
especially in formal situations.
Yeah.
So, like, if you imagine you need a favor from a really busy colleague, instead of just saying, can you help me with this report, which might sound a bit demanding,
Right.
you could say, could you possibly lend a hand with this report when you have a moment?
Yeah. You show that you understand their time is precious by using that could.
That's such a great example.
Yeah.
It really highlights how could can really soften a request and make it less like an order.
Yeah. And that's not the only thing. It's not just about politeness.
Oh.
Could also lets you talk about like possibilities in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying it will rain tomorrow, which just sounds like a certainty,
Yeah.
you might say it could rain tomorrow, which acknowledges that there's still some uncertainty.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got could for polite requests and future possibilities.
Right.
What else does English Unlocked tell us?
Well, they also highlight how could lets us talk about things we were able to do in the past.
Okay.
So while you might say, I can run a marathon now, because you're in great shape,
Yeah.
you'd use could to talk about your younger days. Like, I could run a marathon when I was in college.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole world of hypothetical situations, right?
Of course.
Like, if I won the lottery, I could travel the world.
Yeah, you're not saying it's going to happen,
Right.
but could lets you explore those what ifs.
Exactly. And that's not actually happening, but could lets you explore that.
Yeah, I think another really fascinating thing about could is that a lot of times it sounds more like a suggestion than a direct request.
Okay.
So you could say to a friend, we could go to that new restaurant this weekend. It sounds more open-ended,
Yeah.
less like you're like setting a plan in stone.
Right. That's
Yeah.
a really good point. It's almost like you're testing the waters with could and kind of giving the other person space to chime in with their own thoughts.
Exactly.
Okay.
It creates this collaborative and less demanding tone, which can be really helpful in those social situations.
Yeah.
When you're trying to build rapport.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But English Unlocked also points out some common traps that even advanced English learners can fall into.
Oh, yeah.
They call them can and could conundrums.
Oh, those sneaky little mistakes that trip you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one common one they say is using can when could would be more appropriate in a formal setting.
Right.
Like asking your boss, can I take next Friday off?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of the more polite, could I possibly take next Friday off?
Much better.
Right. It's such a small change.
Yeah.
But it can make a big difference in how you come across.
Huge. And another common mistake, I think, is forgetting to use the base form of the verb after can or could.
Yeah.
It's I can swim,
Yeah.
not I came to swim.
Yes. And those little grammar slips can really throw people off.
They can,
Yeah.
but I think there's, a simple trick to avoiding these mistakes.
Yeah. What's that?
Just pause for a second before you speak.
Okay.
Just ask yourself, like, what's the context here?
Okay.
Am I talking to a friend,
Yeah.
a colleague,
Uh-huh.
or someone I need to be extra respectful towards?
Right.
Am I making a request, offering a suggestion,
Yeah.
or talking about, like, a hypothetical situation.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like a mental check-in to make sure you're using the right word for the right moment.
Yeah. And remember, fluency comes with practice.
Yeah.
The more you use can and could in different contexts, the more natural it will feel.
Okay, well, speaking of practice,
Yep.
English Unlocked has some really great exercises to help you master these kind of tricky words.
They do.
Are you ready to play along?
Yeah, absolutely. Bring it on.
All right. First one. You pass the salt, please.
Okay, so that's a pretty simple request.
Yeah.
Can you pass the salt, please?
Okay, next one. When I was younger, I speak French fluently, but I've gotten rusty over the years.
So that we're talking about a past ability.
Yeah.
So the answer would be could.
Okay.
When I was younger, I could speak French fluently, but I've gotten rusty over the years.
Nice. Okay, now for a hypothetical. If we had more time, we go hiking in the mountains.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a classic what-if scenario.
Yeah.
So we definitely use could. If we had more time, we'd go hiking in the mountains.
Perfect. All right, let's try a polite request. Imagine you're at a conference and you want to ask a speaker a question. How would you phrase it?
In that situation?
Yeah.
Well, I'd want to be extra polite.
Right.
So I would use could.
Okay.
I would say, could I ask you a quick question about your presentation?
Perfect. You're a natural.
I'm learning from the best.
And that's exactly what English Unlocked emphasizes. Practice makes perfect.
Right.
You know, the more you use can and could in your everyday conversations, the more confident you'll become.
You will.
But, you know, there's one final twist to this whole can and could saga
Okay.
that we haven't even touched on yet.
Right.
Did you know that these words can be used for emphasis?
Oh.
To really drive home a point.
For emphasis. Oh, that's interesting.
We'll unpack that and more in just a second.
Using can and could for emphasis. Huh. Now that you mention it,
Yeah.
I have noticed that.
It's subtle,
Yeah.
but it can make a big difference.
For sure.
And English Unlocked gives a great example.
So instead of just saying, I'm hungry, you could say,
Uh-huh.
I could really go for a burger right now.
Yeah, you're not just stating a fact there.
Right.
You're really emphasizing how you feel.
Yeah, it's an expression of longing.
And it doesn't have to be about food.
Right.
You could say, like, that movie was so scary I could barely watch it.
Yeah.
You know, you're emphasizing how intense your fear was.
Right, right. I'm already starting to see how much richer these simple words can be
Yeah.
when you start playing with those nuances.
And remember we were talking about how could is used to soften requests.
Yeah.
It can also soften statements to make them less direct and maybe less confrontational.
Right.
So, for example, instead of saying, it's a bad idea to invest in that company, you could say, it could be risky to invest in that company right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
It's almost like you're presenting your opinion as a possibility
exactly.
rather than like a hard truth. It leaves more room for discussion,
Yeah.
different perspectives.
It reminds me of something else English Unlocked touched on,
Okay.
which is how can and could can sometimes actually reveal a speaker's true intentions,
Right.
even if they're not explicitly stating them.
Oh, yeah. That's so true.
It goes back to what we were saying before about context
Yeah.
and subtle cues.
Yeah.
Like, remember that example we talked about?
Yeah.
Someone says, I could help you move, but I have to work that day.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
It sounds like they're offering to help,
Wow.
but they're throwing in this really convenient excuse for
Right.
why they can't actually do it,
Yeah, it's like a polite way of declining without actually saying no.
right?
And you hear that all the time.
So for someone trying to really master English, what's the takeaway here?
Well, I think it's just being aware of those nuances
Yeah.
and paying attention to how native speakers use them.
Yeah.
You know, don't just focus on the literal meaning,
Right.
but try to also pick up on those unspoken messages that they're sending.
So it's like learning to read between the lines, almost.
Exactly.
Like you're some kind of detective deciphering a code.
And the more you practice, the better you'll get at understanding those cues
Yeah.
and using them yourself.
It's been such an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
I mean, who knew there was so much depth to can and could?
Right. And there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
Language is always evolving, right?
Right.
And the way we use can and could today might be slightly different than how it was even a couple decades ago.
That's a great point, and it reminds me of how some language experts argue that could is actually being overused,
Oh, really?
especially in written communication.
Okay.
They think it makes the language unnecessarily indirect
Right.
and wishy-washy.
Interesting. I mean, I think it definitely reflects a shift towards, more cautious communication.
Yeah.
And maybe less assertive styles.
Right.
But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
Language is all about adapting, right,
Yeah.
to the context. And, in today's world where we do so much online communication, there's more of a need for sensitivity
Yeah, that makes sense.
and diplomacy.
It's all about finding the right balance
Exactly.
between clarity and tact.
And that's where mastering can and could can really be helpful.
Yeah.
Gives you the flexibility to express yourself
Yeah.
in a way that's clear but also considerate.
Okay. So to our listener out there who's maybe on their English learning journey, what's like the one piece of advice you would give them to help them navigate this complex world of can and could?
I would say, don't be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
Try using these words in different contexts. Pay attention to how native speakers use them.
Yeah.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Right. Embrace the mistakes.
That's how we learn and grow.
Yeah. And speaking of mistakes, I have a hilarious story about a time I completely misused could.
Oh, no. Okay, tell me. I'm always up for a good language mishap.
Okay. So picture this. I'm in a cafe, right? And I'm just desperate for some caffeine.
I've been there.
And I see this, barista behind the counter.
Yeah.
And I confidently ask him, I'm like, could you make me a latte, please?
Okay. Sounds like a perfectly normal request. What went wrong?
Well, the barista looks at me with this puzzled expression. And he's like, I could, but I don't work here.
Oh.
Turns out he was just another customer waiting for his order.
That's both embarrassing and hilarious.
It was, but it taught me a valuable lesson.
What's that?
About paying attention to context.
Yeah.
And making sure you're directing your request to the right person.
Absolutely.
Right.
Those real life experiences are the best teachers, I think.
So true.
They stick with you.
But let's get back to English Unlocked. They had one more really interesting point.
Okay.
About how can actually be used to emphasize a warning or to make a statement stronger.
Oh.
Have you ever noticed that?
Now that you mention it, yeah, I think I have.
Yeah.
It's like you're using can to add a sense of urgency or importance.
Like you're saying, pay attention. This is important.
Exactly.
So let's explore this a bit more. We're diving into the final frontier of can and could mastery. So, we've covered a lot of ground with these two little words.
I have.
Can and could, like polite requests, hypotheticals.
Right.
Even declining those requests without saying no.
Yeah.
But this idea from English Unlocked about using can for emphasis, that really caught my ear.
Yeah.
It's like this secret weapon,
It is. It's subtle but effective.
Yeah. For really driving home your point.
Instead of saying, it's hot today,
right?
You could say, it can get incredibly hot here in the summer.
Ooh.
It's a warning.
Yeah, you're not just commenting on the weather then.
Right.
You're like, yeah, watch out.
Exactly. Or, instead of traffic is bad during rush hour,
yeah,
you could say traffic can be a nightmare during rush hour.
Ooh, yeah, you're adding that extra oomph to it.
Yeah.
It's like that can is painting a picture for the listener.
Exactly.
It's like adding an exclamation point.
Yeah, you're adding emphasis without shouting.
Yeah.
Right.
Without being overly dramatic about it.
Exactly.
Right, and it works in all sorts of situations, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of saying this project is important, you could say like this project can make or break our year.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, the stakes are higher suddenly.
Right.
It's not just important, it's like life or death for this project.
It's pivotal.
I mean, it's incredible how such a small word can pack such a punch.
It highlights how language isn't just about information, it's about creating an effect.
Yeah.
Right. Like, how do we want to come across to people?
Right, yeah.
What kind of effect do we want our message to have?
And we've got can and could to help us.
We do. We can be polite. We can explore those possibilities. We can soften statements. We can emphasize things.
I feel like we have this whole arsenal
we do.
of communication strategies at our fingertips.
Yeah, and this is like the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
You'll keep discovering these little nuances the more you learn English.
Yeah.
Keep paying attention, keep experimenting, and you'll be amazed by like the depth and the richness.
So to our listener out there, we really hope that this deep dive has kind of opened your eyes to the hidden power of these two little words.
Absolutely.
And remember, it's not just about memorizing a bunch of rules. It's about, understanding the nuances and really using them strategically.
In different situations.
Yeah.
And have fun with it.
Yeah.
Learning English shouldn't be a chore.
Right.
Celebrate those aha moments.
Yeah.
And keep pushing yourself.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into can and could.
It is.
We hope you enjoyed the journey.